I would like to welcome everybody to Robin's Nest. We are in season 2. This is episode 17, but is the second episode of Interview with a Stranger. Today's guest is Ben Herstig. And Ben is not exactly a stranger, so I'm calling it Interview with a Not Really a Stranger. He's a little bit of a stranger to me. All the questions that I'm going to be asking today are questions that I don't know the answers to. But I do know Ben a little bit because he is going to be the roommate of my youngest daughter, Zoe. They are friends from Temple University. I know very little about him, as I said. So I thought he did sort of qualify for Interview with a Stranger. I thought we could get to know Ben together, my listeners and me. And I thought you, Ben, would be a very compelling guest because it sounds like you've had a very interesting journey as a transgender male. And hello, it's Pride Month in June when this is recording. Yes, so it seems quite timely. So I would really love to hear all about your journey, and I thought the world would as well. So I thought we could just jump right on in. Welcome.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it.
Of course. I love talking about myself.
Perfect. That's the perfect podcast.
Yeah.
Okay, so could you actually start at the very beginning? One question that I thought would be important to ask before we even get started is, what is a transgender male? I, of course, know what a transgender male is, but I think that there are people out there that are so confused by the whole LGBTQ. What's queer mean? What's transgender exactly? How does that differ from being gay? So if you could just explain that to people,
yeah,
I would appreciate it.
Yeah. So, well, the definition of a transgender is someone who identifies as a different gender than the sex that they were assigned at birth. So when you come out of your mom and the doctor looks at you and they're like, oh, it's a blank, it's a boy, it's a girl, whatever. I was assigned female when I came out of my mother. And then I was like, oh, wait a second, this doesn't match up. This doesn't work for me. My brain doesn't identify as female. I actually identify as male. So that is what transgender is. So you would call me a transgender male because I identify as male now and I am a male. But yeah, so cisgender on the opposite end, which is, it's spelled CISGENDER, which is what you are. You were assigned female at birth and you identify as female still. So that's the opposite side, is cisgender, and then transgender is what I am.
That is very, very, very helpful. Yes. And how would you define queer?
Oh gosh, queer.
I think that's very confusing to people also.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to my grandpa about this yesterday.
Really?
But yeah, so queer is a few things. It's like queer, I use LGBT and queer interchangeably when I'm talking about the community. Because sometimes it's a lot to say LGBTQIA plus whatever, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, so I use queer and LGBT interchangeably. So that can be a word for the LGBT community, or some people identify as queer as well, which could mean really whatever it means to them. It could mean anything. It could mean that they identify as bisexual, but they want to, call it queer just because they don't want to call themselves bisexual, because, labels can be annoying and confusing sometimes. Right. But yeah, so sometimes people don't want to define their sexuality or their gender as anything else other than queer because it's so fluid, or because they aren't sure, or whatever. Right. It could be really whatever you make it. It's kind of
like an umbrella term.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like that's always how I think about it. It's like queer is like the umbrella term, and then you could be all kinds of things under that.
Exactly, just like transgender is the umbrella term for the transgender community, and then I'm a transgender male, right? And other people identify as non-binary or queer, queer can fall under that too.
Can you explain non-binary?
Oh gosh, non-binary, I believe, is when someone doesn't identify with either of the binary genders, which are male and female. But I'm not as qualified to speak to that. That's for sure.
Okay, fair enough. So why
Yeah.
don't you start a little bit at the beginning and tell us a little bit about where you grew up, what your childhood experience was like, what your parents, your siblings, all of that.
Yeah. So I grew up in Minnetonka, Minnesota. I have one older brother, and my parents were from Ohio, so big Midwest family. But Minnetonka is pretty diverse when it comes to suburbs. So,
Oh,
I'm Jewish also, just like you. So,
oh,
growing up, went to synagogue, went to the elementary school down the road. It had a big Somali population, big Hmong population, which is an area of Asia. So, we were surrounded by a lot of different types of people, as well as a lot of Jewish kids, and my synagogue was right next door and all that. So so we moved from Pittsburgh, where I was born, there when I was 4, to Minnetonka. And I mean, it was a really welcoming, very open community. Everybody knows everybody. um Obviously there's, people have their problems with other people, which you don't really learn about until you grow up. But
right, right.
from my perspective, everybody was friends, and my community, my Jewish community, was very open, very accepting. Just even before I came out as transgender. But I went to a conservative synagogue, but everybody was
Oh,
very nice. No problems there. Um, and my childhood experience, my parents got divorced when I was 12, which coincidentally is around the age that I came out to, and I
oh,
started
is it?
figuring out my identity. So um, I don't know if this is jumping ahead too far,
No,
but
no,
but
it's great.
a lot of people thought that, when my parents got divorced, because that's when I started figuring out my identity, they thought that it was kind of a pushback to my
Uh-huh.
parents getting divorced. So it was definitely interesting to be telling people that I was transgender, and a lot of them were like, "Are you sure? Like that you're not just
Was there
trying to?"
any reason for your timing? Was it
No,
just
like
purely coincidence?
no, I think it was pure. I mean, I'm sure that I was questioning my whole being when my parents got divorced, but
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't like I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna get revenge or
Oh, no.
reconcile with it in this way," or anything like that. I think it was just timing. When my parents got divorced, I started doing this theater. I joined a theater group at our local JCC, Jewish Community Center, and it just so happened that the directors of this summer camp were both transgender men. And
Really?
yes, and so
Wow.
I wasn't questioning anything at that point, but well, I was, thinking about life in a very introspective way. But
How old were you at this point?
like 11 or 12.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, I joined, and I really took a liking to these guys, both of them. And I kind of found out that one of them was transgender through like Facebook or something. And so um, after more talking with him, he was like, "Oh yeah, like Anthony is also trans," the other guy. And I was like, "No way! Like, are you kidding me? I never would have been able to tell." And so, we started talking more, all three of us, and I
And
was,
what were you feeling at this point? Were you like, wow, I didn't even know this was a thing and this feels liberating to
yeah,
me?
yeah. I think I was just oh, like this all feels, I at this point in my life, very just logical. Like, like, oh, this sounds familiar, so this, one thing leads to another. Not like, I wasn't super into like feeling out emotions like out in the open, really, and being like
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable in that way. So I was just like, oh well, this makes sense, so it must be what I also am, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
But yeah,
So you were
so
thinking about it very intellectually and not
very
very
intellectually,
emotionally.
right, which is
Mhm.
why I
So
don't
you were
think that.
figuring it out, but not feeling it out.
Right. I mean, I was feeling it out in the sense that, like, I was like, oh well, this feels right.
Okay.
But I wasn't really focused on the like, I don't really know. Like I wasn't focused on how other people were feeling about it, or if this would be okay for my family, or like what would happen, like with my family, or would they accept me, anything like that. I wasn't really thinking about all that stuff. But
Okay.
anyway, so yeah, I just was kind of like, well, this seems to make sense. So I spent a long time, because I'm a procrastinator by nature, spent a long time thinking about it. And eventually I was just kind of like, well, I think I'm probably trans in some way. I just don't know if I'm a guy, because I didn't feel like I was non-binary, like we talked about earlier. I didn't feel like I was non-binary. I didn't think that I should be using they them pronouns or anything like that. But she her also didn't feel right. But it took me a long time to kind of come to this conclusion of, okay, I actually identify as male and I want people to call me he, him. And I wanted to just try it out. I got my hair cut and that felt right. I was just kind of like step by step. I was like, okay,
Ah,
this feels right. This feels good. I'm just going to do this. If it doesn't feel good, I'll just grow it out. So, and I ran it by a lot of my friends. I was like, I think I'm trans. And they were like, oh yeah, like probably that makes sense. Like we know that you're not probably like a girl and stuff like that.
mhm.
So anyway, so yeah, I got my hair cut, and these guys helped me through this whole thing. They didn't push anything on me. They didn't, they weren't like, oh, you are trans and we can tell you that for a fact. Like nothing like that. They were just like, this is how we feel. This is what we did, how we felt. You do with that information what you will.
Was this the very first time you had these thoughts, though? Or had you thought of these, had you felt this way before?
I don't think that I knew, like, if I did have thoughts like this, like, I wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm a guy, I'm supposed to be a guy. But, there are a lot of kids who go to their parents and they're like, Mom, Dad, I'm supposed to be a boy or whatever. I'm supposed to be a
Yeah,
girl.
when they're very
But
little.
I never did that. I was more just like a tomboy, and
Okay.
I was just like
So that's really how
indifferent.
you identified. You identified
Right.
more as a tomboy, like
Right.
just a girl who liked to do more
Was
boyish things.
right. Exactly. Yeah. I don't know. I was just kind of like indifferent towards most gender related things. I,
Okay.
had an older brother, so I would wear his clothes a lot and his shorts, and I would be like, great, this is what I want to dress up as, like this is how I want to
This
present
feels
myself to the
good.
world.
Right.
Exactly.
This feels right.
I do remember though, this specifically with my bat mitzvah, which
Hmm.
I call it my bar mitzvah now, but with my bat mitzvah, I
For those
almost
people who don't know the difference, bat mitzvah's for a girl and bar mitzvah's for a boy. So now you
yes,
refer to it as a bar mitzvah, but at the time it was a
right.
bat mitzvah.
Right. And
Okay.
some people, if they don't want to call it bar mitzvah, can call it b'nai mitzvah.
That's
Yeah. Like,
correct. It's like a gender
exactly.
neutral.
Exactly. So anyway, yeah. So at my bar mitzvah, I was like, my mom always tells me, she's like, I didn't think you were going to go through with it because you were so upset about having to wear the dress and, like having to sing, like just a whole weekend about you. And it's a gendered thing, it's like, because I was a girl, I was doing it at age 12 instead of 13, or, like, I don't know. There were just so many
Right.
different
But it
gendered
was about
things.
becoming a woman.
Exactly.
Right.
So she was like, I did not think you were going to go through with it. I did, though. Like, my whole family was there, and, it was
How did it feel though?
honestly, I think I blocked it out. I think that because I can't answer so many of these things, it's because I was just like, this is too traumatizing. I'm gonna put it over here and never think about it again. You know
Okay.
what I mean?
So you were
So
really disassociated from it.
yeah, I think I
Mm-hmm.
did. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what I'm starting to realize now as I
Mm-hmm.
grow up, because I don't remember so much of my childhood. And I think it's because of that, you
Wow.
know?
When
And
do you
all
first go ahead?
yeah.
No,
And that
go
all
ahead.
had to do with my parents' divorce as well. They were both traumatizing things, or things that bothered me a lot, but they weren't related in that way.
Yes, yes, that
Mhm.
makes total sense.
Yes.
What can you pinpoint a time where you first realized, was it when these two men came into your life? That was the first time where you were like, I think I'm a transgender male.
I think, yes, like I met them and I was like, oh, I'm probably like queer, as I would say now, in
Uh-huh.
some way. I didn't know how to put it then, but I think I went onto YouTube, as one does, and I found like a bunch of videos, and I found this guy. His name is Benton, and I watched a video of him doing an interview with his best friend, and he's a trans guy, and he was doing an interview with his best friend, who was this girl, and they were talking, and it sounded almost identical to me and my best friend growing up. Her name is Bryn. It sounded almost like identical to how we talk to each other, and like, just I really related to these two, and they were funny, and she was like, oh yeah, I always knew that you were different, and like all this stuff. And she was like, I didn't know if you were a boy, you were a lesbian, anything like that, but I knew that you were different. And so I was like, well, that sounds just like me and Bryn. So I looked into this guy a little bit more, and I was like, yeah, I think that this feels right.
Wow.
So I'm not sure like what it was that clicked, but I was just kind of like, okay, I think that I'm a guy. And then from that point forward, moved on.
When and what did you share with your parents? When
Okay,
did you
so
decide to say it, and what did you say? And what was the
yeah.
reaction?
So also at this point in my life, my dad was starting to date a new woman, and she is like 10 years younger than him, kind of like in between our ages, like a little bit. Like, she's obviously closer in age to him, but she's very hip. Her name is Barb. She's awesome. She is very, progressive, and her and I got very close during after my parents got divorced, and we started to move in with her and all of that. And so she was basically one of my best friends throughout middle school and high school. So as all of this was going on, I sent her an email with a video attached that was like, it was like, here is what transgender is. And like, I am transgender. It was like the video was speaking for me. It was like, I am transgender male, and these are the pronouns I want you to use for me now. And I'll probably change my name and all of this stuff. And in the email I said, I'm not changing my name or my pronouns yet, but this is how I feel. So it was a very like, not like, I wouldn't say it to anyone's face. And so I was
How
like,
old are you at that point?
I was like probably 13.
Okay.
I was in like 7th or 8th grade. And so I sent it to her, and the subject line was, don't open this around dad.
Well,
So I didn't want my dad to know. So, she was like, okay, let's get coffee and I'll like talk about it. So we talked about it, and she was like, well, you have to tell your dad, because, now I know, like, it's hard to keep stuff from each other. We don't want to do that. So
mhm.
I sent the same email to my dad, I guess. She tells me this. And then he was like, oh, well, you have to tell your mom. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll tell my mom. And so I think I sent her the same email. It was just all over email.
So this whole conversation is happening over email. Like, so even when he's saying you have to tell your mom,
No,
he's responding to the email?
That was over the phone.
Okay.
The phone. Yeah. But I don't know. I think I was just like, whoever needs to know, I'm just going to tell them, and then we can move forward. I didn't want any of that.
Copy them on this email.
Exactly. I should have CC'd everybody. But, then I started getting I got a call from my brother, and I still have the voicemail, but it was the sweetest call ever. And he was like, listen, I don't care if you're black, white, a giraffe or whatever, like an animal, whatever you identify. I don't care. You're my sibling, and I love you, and all of this stuff. And that was kind of the moment that I was like, okay, I can do this. We got this.
And what did your mom say?
Oh, she's the exact same thing. I love you no matter what. You're my child. She's the biggest advocate of them all now. So.
And what was your dad's reaction, other than tell your mom?
Exactly how I was, thinking logically about all of it. The exact same thing. Just, okay, this is how you feel. Let's sit on it, think about it, and we'll move forward when we need to, or if we need to. And sounds good,
So
like
how did all
whatever your
that feel
decision
to
is,
you?
I support you. It was great. I loved it.
Mm,
I
mm,
think that I was just like, okay, that's like what I expected. I just didn't want to have to tell them, not because I didn't think they would support me, but because I didn't want to have to tell them. The actual telling itself was stressful.
mhm.
But afterward, I was just like, great, let's move on. Let's do it.
Why do you think it felt so stressful, the idea to just tell them, if you knew
Well,
that they'd be so supportive?
I mean, obviously there were some questions of how they would show their support and all of
Mhm,
that. But I think just any form of coming out of the closet, that's how people put it. I think any form of revealing your true self to the world is stressful, and it's nerve-wracking and anxiety
mhm.
inducing, because this is something that you've held near to your heart for so long, and just within yourself, and it hasn't really even seen the light of day.
Yeah.
So
It really puts you
revealing,
in a vulnerable position.
right, and being vulnerable is not my favorite thing to do. so
It's not
so
any of our favorite things to do, Ben.
exactly. So, and I knew that it would be a big deal, and I didn't want it to be a big deal. So, just little things like that, they they are a big thing altogether. And I was just like, I don't want to have to deal with this.
Yeah.
Um, which is probably why, when I did come out, I just like did the things that I needed to do and didn't really talk about them much, and just kind of, just did it, because I was like, I don't want this to be a thing. I don't want anybody to bother me, like, you don't need to worry about me. I got it, like, in terms of bullying, like, I didn't really get bullied all that much, because I was just like, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. And if anyone has a problem with it, kind of like, F off. Like, I don't need that in my life. So it was probably like I'm really scared inside, but I'm gonna like make it seem like I'm not from the on the outside, and then people didn't mess with me.
Were
So
all of your
it was
friends
good.
supportive, or did any of your friends have a negative reaction?
No, all of my friends were supportive, and honest to God, if there was someone who wasn't uh supportive, I don't even remember. And I probably was just like, all right, well, we're not friends anymore. I think that the people who've had the most blowback because of the generation that they are, is my parents and my grandparents. And
Mm.
even my brother's friends are all like, okay, whatever, like, he's your brother now, cool, let's drink, like, they don't care.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. What kind of feedback do your parents and your grandparents get?
So I guess that I just learned about this recently, but I guess that my mom had a little bit of just like pushback on like Facebook, and from people who she doesn't even talk to really anymore, just people on Facebook. And I guess that they've just made like little comments here and there, because like I said, like, I was just very much like, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. And I think that everybody around me kind of took that, and they were like, okay, like, he's confident, he
He's
knows who he
clear.
is, so let's,
Mhm.
like, we will do the same thing. We will, like a chameleon, the whole family was like, all right, like, we're no one's questioning anything, we're confident. So I
What
don't
kind
think that,
what
you
kind of
know
comments would you say your mom gets? Like when you say like little comments, or your
probably
grandparents?
stuff, probably just political stuff, like, oh, what bathroom does he use, and like, oh, I don't know if I agree with that, and little stuff like that
Wow.
you
Okay,
know
that's pretty
yeah.
offensive.
Well, yeah, and
The
people
first
don't even
question I can
realize.
see, the first question I can see being people being confused and curious.
Right,
Not that that's an okay thing to ask, but
right.
it's
Or like, has he
it's
had the surgery, like
right, right.
that
People
sort of
are
stuff.
confused and curious, but
Yeah.
what was the second thing that you said?
um I said,
Oh, I don't really agree with that, or
oh,
something like
right,
that.
right, right, right.
Yeah,
Well,
I
I don't
can't
know if I
imagine.
agree with that.
Yeah, like you were asked. Like who
Come
asked
on.
you?
Right,
What is it?
exactly.
How do your
That's
parents?
exactly how they respond. Yeah.
No. And how do your parents and your grandparents respond to these kinds of comments?
Well, and the reason I say my grandparents is because I'm with them right now, and
Uh-huh.
they've been telling me about this, or my bubby has been telling me about this stuff, and she is like,
I
well,
had a bubby.
yeah, gotta love your bubby. And so she just said, I was sitting there, I would sit there playing Maj with my girlfriends, and she
Mahjong for
says,
people who
yeah,
don't know what Maj is.
exactly.
Mhm.
And she said, I just talk about you like it's not a big deal, like I have a transgender grandson, like good for me, whatever. Everyone has their
So
things,
cute.
and apparently, just some of them have made their political views obvious. And she said, I don't need I don't need them in my life. And my mom has said the same stuff. Like, if you really feel that strongly about my son and about someone who does not even affect your life that much, that is your problem. We don't
Yeah.
we don't need to interact anymore. No
Yeah.
skin off my back to stop talking to you, if we
Yeah.
even talked at all in the first place. Like, who
Yeah.
asked you? Exactly like you said. Who asked
Right.
you?
What's really interesting to me is, my generation, which is your mother's generation. How old's your mom and dad?
My mom just turned 51,
Right.
and my
Okay.
dad
So
is 50.
I'm a little bit older than them, but not by much. Um, but in our generation, this was not cool.
Yeah.
Like it just was not cool. If you knew 2 or 3 gay people growing up, that was a lot.
Yeah.
Because again, not because there weren't more gay people, but because they
Yeah.
were closeted. And
Exactly.
it's literally cool now to be gay. And it's almost a little bit not so cool to be
To be straight or to be
straight or
cisgender. Yeah.
cisgender, right? And it's very, the people in my generation just really, and one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the pod, because a
Mhm.
lot of my listeners are of my generation,
Yeah.
your generation is so relaxed, which
Mhm.
is amazing. I mean, it's
Mhm.
amazing what has happened in just one generation, the
Mhm.
changes that have happened where you can say, yeah, I'm transgender. And we're like, your friends are like, okay, great.
Okay,
Where are we
cool.
going on Saturday?
Right.
Good.
Exactly.
Thanks for sharing,
Yeah.
and when, I have friends who are gay, who are my age or a little older than me, and
Mhm.
that was not their experience.
No, not at
So this
all.
is
Yeah.
remarkably different and
Yeah.
wonderfully, just such a wonderful shift.
Absolutely. And I don't know, maybe we all got the same memo at the same time somehow,
Yes.
through just brain wavelengths or whatever. But yeah, my outlook is like, you have one life in this world. And like, first of all, why does it matter to you what other people do with theirs as long as it doesn't negatively affect you? And I know that's putting it very simply, but to put it simply, that is how I feel about that. And then on the other side, yourself, like, why wouldn't you, no matter how old you are, I don't care if you're 60, I don't care if you're 80, if you figure out who you are,
Mhm.
why wouldn't you live that
Yes.
true life? Why wouldn't
Yes.
you be
Yes. Well,
yourself?
you're speaking to a really interesting point. I heard a question asked once at an event I went to, and the question was, why are there so many gays all of a sudden? Somebody asked that question to a gay woman who was presenting.
Yep.
And everyone laughed and was like, oh my God, I can't believe she
Yeah.
said that. And the woman said, it's not that there are more gay people all of a sudden. It is
Nope.
that they've tasted freedom,
Hmm.
they've tasted liberation, and it's the liberation that's catchy, not the
Exactly.
gayness that's catchy. And so, like,
Exactly.
as people have become more honest and living their authentic life, the
Hmm.
next person says, I want to live an authentic life
That's
too.
how I feel too.
And that's
Exactly.
what happened to you when you met those 2 men. They were
Exactly.
living authentically in their bodies the way they
Mhm.
wanted to live. And you were like, I want that too. Not that the idea of, oh, maybe I want to be trans came
Mm-mm.
to you. It was just, I want freedom too. And that
Right.
feels right for me.
Exactly. And the whole time I've been here, my bubby has been saying about everything. You don't know what you don't know. And so
Yes.
when it comes to like being gay or being trans, there for millions of years, however long people have been around, there have been transgender people, there have been gay people, but if they don't know that it's an option, then either they are going to probably be severely depressed and they don't know why, or, you know, just like there are gay people and there have always been transgender people.
Always been.
Exactly.
Have always been.
Exactly.
So how old were you when you decided to start to transition?
I think I was about 14 probably. That's when I got a haircut. But like I said, I'm a procrastinator. So what happened was I got my hair cut to a little, you know, Bieber cut. It was nice and flippy. It was awesome. And then I started wearing more male presenting clothing, and then I got a chest binder, which is a material where it basically compresses your chest and makes it look more male, quote unquote. Okay. And then immediately I started being identified as male in public, which doesn't happen to everybody. I guess that my voice was just low enough and kind of like adolescent male enough that I was being correctly identified in public, and that was kind of overwhelming to me. I was like, oh my god, like I'm not ready for this, whatever. But it kind of pushed me forward a little bit into being like, oh, okay, this feels right, you know, like it feels a lot better than it did before. So, you know, with she, her pronouns. So so that started happening. I was kind of like, okay, like I would love if people started calling me a nickname from my birth name, because I didn't have a name yet, and that was really important to me, was that I wanted to find a meaningful, or just something that clicked. Didn't have to be meaningful, but yeah, so I asked people to start calling me a nickname, and he, him, if they could remember to. It was basically like a, you know, if you remember, cool. And then I basically came out on, it was June 28th, 2014 on Instagram. And the reason I remember that is because I also got my top surgery on the same day in 2019. So that's a meaningful day for me. But yeah, so I came out over Instagram, and then I came out over Facebook at Pride. I was at Pride with my other trans friends, and they were like, you might as well tell everyone. And I was like, sounds good. So I told everyone. And
how did it feel to tell everyone? It
felt great. It was awesome. You know, I was just like, all right, this is, take this and do with it what you want, you know. And then I waited 2 years to change my name. Really? And so, like I said, I'm a procrastinator. I didn't really think about it that much. But I had everyone calling me by he, him pronouns. And then in 2016, my sophomore, going into junior year of high school, I was in the car with my best friend and my mom. And my mom was like, hey, you really need to change your name because people are getting really confused. And I was like, okay, fine. So my favorite show, or my favorite movie growing up, was Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
It's a great one. It's a great one.
Amazing movie with Donny Osmond.
Love it.
And it's the best. And so I used to watch it every day when I would come home.
We do share a love of musical theater, Ben.
I think that we do. So my mom started, you know, there's 12 brothers. My mom started going through all the names, and she said, Issachar, you know, Naphtali, Judah, like all the funny, you know. She was like, Dan. And I was like, no, like this is all the way too much. She goes, Joseph. And I go, I've thought about it, but no. And then she said, Benjamin. And I said, okay. And that, there you go. Like
that was that hard for your parents to call you a different name?
I don't think so, because I had already not really been going by my birth name that much. Okay. So I think that they were just like, okay, like finally he changed his name, because it was getting kind of ridiculous. And then right after that, my dad was like, okay, well, let's change it. If you're sure about it, let's change it legally. And so I didn't have to deal with it later, because I was still underage at this time, you know,
right? Because
he didn't want me to have to deal with anything like with when I turned 18 and my driver's license and all that.
So all that says male.
Yep, everything says
You're
male.
allowed,
And
how do you do that? How do you go through the process of changing your gender legally?
I well, okay, so it was actually quite a hassle because I was born in Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
So I had to get a new birth certificate from Pennsylvania that said male. And I think, honestly, I think you just pay for it. I think you just apply and pay for it. And it's a thing because there are people, intersex people, who sometimes are born and identified as what what their parents say. Okay, put this on the birth certificate, but then later in life they realize, okay, this isn't right for me. So I think that that's why it's already a law, which works
Mm.
great for me, because I'm pretty sure, and he would have to correct me because I wasn't really involved in the process, but I think that we just applied and got approved and pay for it. And then we went, once we had the birth certificate, we went to the Hennepin County court system in Minneapolis, and we had a court day. It was really fun. I went, I wore a suit, I brought my best friends. The judge said, "So why do you want to change your name?" And I said, "I don't know. I like it." And she was like, "Why did you choose Benjamin?" And I was like, "I don't know. I like it." And she was like, "And why do you want, like, why do you think that you're male?" And I was like, "Honestly, I couldn't tell you. I just identify, like I just am a guy." And she was like, "Okay." And she, stamped it or whatever she did, and it was done.
I think it is incredibly brave that you went through this entire process in high school.
And like, how am I like, thank you. But to me, it was just like, okay, we're just doing the next thing, and my parents made it so easy for me. That was the amazing part. I'm
Incredibly blessed. Yeah.
incredibly privileged in that sense. So, you know, and now, as a, a young adult, I am starting to, look at it and be like, oh my God, I was so goddamn privileged. And I didn't even think about anything else. Like, I don't even know. I didn't have any perspective.
Yeah.
So I had no idea that it was brave. And even now, I'm like, I was just doing my thing,
You're just
like,
doing the next right thing for you at the
exactly,
time that it felt
exactly.
to do it. What is the most supportive and least supportive thing anyone has ever said to you about being transgender?
So I would definitely say the most supportive is, people love to make a big deal out of it and be like, I support you no matter what, and all of that. Obviously, that's amazingly supportive. But my favorite thing that people
Yeah.
say when they're being supportive is almost nothing at all. When they're just like, oh, okay, sounds good. Like you said, with all of my friends, like, okay, great. What are we having for dinner? Or, just like all my brother's friends, like, all right, sounds good. What are we, like, what are we doing tonight?
Yeah, that makes a
So
lot of sense to me.
yeah, because like I said earlier, I'm not interested in making it a big deal unless I bring it up, or unless I'm interested in. About it, like today.
Right.
So, and the least supportive, people don't, people are afraid to say not supportive things to my face, I think, which I did that, by being so confident. But probably, well, I support you, but I don't really understand other people, because I think recognizing my privilege as someone who is correctly identified as male all the time
Mhm.
is really important, because there are a lot of people who don't get
Mm.
correctly identified as the gender that they identify as or want to be
Yes.
perceived as. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with me specifically, but just like people accepting me because I look like how they think I should as a male person, and then not being able to understand the other people who don't look how they expect them to, or how they would want them to if they were to be calling them by he, him pronouns. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, like, how do you react, or has this ever happened to you where people say, like what you said about the men the transgender males that you met originally,
Mhm.
when you said your initial reaction was, wow, I never would have known.
Yeah.
So when someone says that to you, oh my God,
Mhm.
I would have never known you were born a girl.
Yeah.
How does that feel to you?
Like, good for you. I don't know. Like, well, I was, and everybody looks different. And like,
So when someone
I
says that,
think,
that doesn't feel complimentary to you, and it doesn't feel offensive either?
I mean, it doesn't feel complimentary. And I think that they think that it's complimentary, which is
Yes.
why they're saying it.
Mhm.
Because they want me to know that they support me, which is amazing. I'm not going to be like, well, screw you, nothing like that.
Mhm.
I typically, when people say that, I say, well, it's very nice of you to say, but I don't see that as a compliment. I think that it kind of, um, it's kind of rude to the people who don't
Mhm.
like pass that inspection in a
Mhm.
way.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a
Mhm.
fan of that.
Yeah, that's why I wanted you to say it, because I
Yeah.
think that people don't know what to say,
Oh yeah.
and I think that that's people's first reaction.
Yeah.
Like if someone, looks at someone and they look male, and then they're told that that this person is transgender, I
Yeah.
think people's initial reaction is, oh, wow, I would never have even
I
known.
never would have known you looked so much like a boy. Well, that's
Yeah.
great because I am, and so is that guy over there,
Right, who may
and
not necessarily look like a boy.
look
It doesn't
like a
change
boy or whatever
anything.
that means. Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And
yeah.
I mean, I also I really like using my privilege in that way for the shock factor also, which, like, if I'm in a
Yeah.
class
Mhm.
and people don't know that I'm trans and we're talking about trans issues, I typically wait a little while to say that I'm trans because I like seeing the looks on their faces because they're literally questioning their whole existence in that moment of like, well, we've been talking about trans stuff and I've been sharing a
I would
few
do the same
opinions,
thing.
and then someone's like, I'm sharing an opinion, and this has happened a few times in classes in high school or in college, where I'll be sharing an opinion and then I'll kind of hint at something where like I know something that they don't, and everybody in the class will just kind of be like, well, why are you saying, you're a guy, so why are you being, well, A, so open-minded, and B, why are you acting like you know what you're talking about? And then, I'll be like, oh, well, as a transgender person myself, and then I'll just keep talking, like, don't
I
leave
love
any
it.
room
I
for the
love it.
surprise.
I love
And
it.
and it's just like people are shocked, which, and I know that that's a privilege that I have that
Mhm.
not everybody has. So using it to your advantage is really fun.
Yeah.
And then after that class, I actually was in that class with another trans guy, which I didn't know at the time. And he was a resident in one of the buildings that I worked in. And I remember at the end of that year, I was doing room checks because I was an RA. And this kid in my class, he was sleeping in one of the rooms that I, went into, and I accidentally woke him up, and it was all funny and all that. And I left to let him get dressed and leave the room so I could do the room check. And as he came out, he said, "Were you in my like Women in America class earlier this semester?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "You're the reason that I came out to my parents last week." I know.
Oh.
He said, I didn't know your name, and I didn't, like, I didn't follow you on Instagram or anything, but I've been wanting to say thank you. And I was just like,
Wow.
that's why I do that, like,
Yes.
that is,
Yes. You never know who is
no,
listening and the impact you're having. You just don't.
exactly. It makes it all worth it.
What was most surprising to you about people's reactions? Was there anything that was particularly surprising to you that kind of caught you off guard, positively or negatively?
Probably just like, okay, well, you're a guy now, so you have to act this way, or you have to look this way, or, like, you have to have these opinions and talk about women like this and just all that sort of stuff. That surprised me, and also, like, I want nothing to do with it,
Of course. Yeah.
So a lot of like my like day-to-day advocacy, if you want to call it that, is like, okay, well, I can act however I want, and if I'm still a guy. I can dress however I want, I'm still a guy, because that's not what makes me a guy. That's
Amen.
I wasn't like, oh, I want to speak badly about women, so I'm gonna become a guy. Like that's not how
Wow.
it works. So I
Yeah.
think that's just more my personality, not the fact that I'm trans. Like that part coming out, but definitely that was surprising to me, where like
And
especially men, the older men at synagogue were like, well, you have to wear a yarmulke now and all this stuff. And I was like, I mean, I guess I will, but just because I'm a guy, like I just started questioning all of that
right,
stuff,
it just shows you, just the gender roles that we are constantly trying to shove people into.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as a psychotherapist, and having male clients, a lot of times I have male clients who were born, who are cisgender and who are
Yeah.
straight,
Mhm.
who are sensitive,
Yeah.
and and who are told their whole life to be and behave and think a certain way that is
Mhm.
just not how they identify, and how society is constantly putting people, female and male, in
Yeah.
these different boxes. And now you had to experience it as a transgender
Right.
person.
Right. But it's so interesting because I still fall into that problem of, okay, well, when I transitioned, I put myself in these boxes of, I have to act this way, I have to whatever, I can't cross my legs, like stuff like that, like in public. And now I'm starting to deconstruct all of this
Good.
internalized toxic masculinity that I gave myself, right? So
Yes.
that is why, one of my best friends is a cisgender male. And we talk about this all of the time, where we're like, I love you, bro. Like, why am I saying I love you, bro? Why can't I just say I love you to my male best friend? You know what I mean? So like we talk
Yes.
about this all the time, where even I, as a trans guy, I have experienced not womanhood because I was so young, but I've experienced being put into that category of female and being allowed to be so sensitive and cry all the time and all of that. And I've also experienced this side of it now of, okay, put
Being
all your
told
emotions
to
into a
be
box.
toxic. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Exactly. So even I, as someone who's experienced the female side of things, quote unquote, I still struggle with the same things that these cisgender men do, which is really interesting to me.
Yeah. You have a lot to teach
A
the
lot to learn.
world. You have a lot to learn, but you have a lot to teach because you've experienced both sides
Mhm.
of this gender identity stuff. This is how you behave as a girl, this is how you're supposed to behave as a guy. And if you want to be a guy, you better act this way. And
Mhm.
you're having an internal experience saying, but that's not how I feel. And I
Mhm.
still feel like a guy. And that
Exactly.
is true about men that are born men
Yes,
also.
exactly.
They're having that same experience. But you were like thrown into it, and they've had
Exactly.
it, the messaging, all their lives.
Their
And
lives.
to
I
be able
know.
to say, like, how when you were being brought up as a girl initially,
Mhm.
you had certain societal messages, and that when you transitioned, you got polar opposite messages, not
Mhm.
from your parents but from the world.
From the world.
And yeah, and it's just so clear.
Yeah. And I think it's been so helpful to me also because my brother is one of those sensitive guys.
Yeah.
And it's funny because like he cries more often than I do. And like
Yes.
he is more outwardly sensitive than I am. And he's a frat guy, like he was in a frat in college. And so I think he struggles a lot with that, but we
Absolutely.
kind of help each other reconcile with this toxic masculinity and all of that jazz because I help him realize that he can be sensitive outwardly. And then he does the same for me because he's showing me that there's a cisgender male who is crying to his brother, just like we help each other in those ways, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. And
So,
what I
yeah.
would want to say to your brother is that more men, more cisgendered men, are more like him than the
Mhm.
toxic masculinity. They are just pretending to be
Yeah,
that
exactly.
way to be accepted, because
Yeah,
being accepted and belonging is such a powerful drug. And they think that that's the
absolutely.
price of admission. But the reality is, we're just human beings that are
We're human
born
beings.
caring and loving and sensitive and
Exactly.
emotional, whether you're female or male. So anyway, we
That's
have
how I
to,
feel too.
yeah, we have to move
Yeah.
along. What is
And
the
yeah,
best and worst advice that you've ever received in your life?
my God, just ever.
Ever?
Well, people have said a lot of unhelpful things. Um, honestly, I like the saying. I like what my puppy's been saying to me. You don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's true and really good advice. Like, I don't think it's fair. I don't know. I don't think it's fair to judge people on the things that they don't know, but to also hold, I think it's fair to hold them accountable for learning. So you don't know
Yes,
what you
both
don't
can be
know.
true.
Exactly.
You
So
can
I think,
forgive people for their ignorance if they're
right.
interested in getting the information.
Exactly. And I think that that's probably what I would say. I don't know how to word it right, but
Yeah.
exactly what you were just saying. Like
Uh-huh.
that sentiment just throughout
Uh-huh.
life is like really important to me, especially as I'm a music education major. The educational aspect is really important to me, as it has been my whole life. Of everybody is always learning. I hate judging people for something that they can't help,
Yes.
and for things that they don't know. Like, just
Yes.
because someone doesn't know what transgender means does not mean that I have to be all up in arms about them accidentally misgendering me, because they don't understand it.
Right.
Now, if we've been working on it for 2 years and they're still misgendering me, and they still are
And
like,
there's
well,
some
I
other
don't get
agenda
it.
going on.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Then
That's something
then
else.
I'm gonna judge them on that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know, just being a not only tolerant but accepting person, and just, I don't know, I think that this is just the values that I've been raised on, of like,
Mm-hmm.
don't judge people for something they can't control. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Be not only not only tolerant but accepting, and be curious. Try to learn when you can, and don't make don't make quick judgments like that. So
Mm.
that's been really helpful. And least helpful, I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And why did you choose Temple?
I chose Temple because I wanted to leave Minnesota. Not because I don't like Minnesota, but just because I wanted to like expand my boundaries. And I wanted to leave Minnesota, and I wanted to do music education, and I wanted a good urban program, because I wanted to be surrounded by people who didn't look or sound or act like me. And so first I was only looking within like 7 hours driving, because I wanted to be able to drive back and forth if I wanted to. And I found DePaul University in Chicago, which is a great private school in the heart of Chicago, and I loved it. But I didn't like their music school. So I went online and I was like, okay, what are schools like DePaul on the East or West Coast? Because I expanded my boundaries a little bit.
Mm.
And Temple came up. I looked into it. I was like, hey, Dad, I want to visit this place. He was like, okay, sounds good. I went to the campus. I loved Philly. I loved the campus. I wanted it to be kind of a smaller campus, but still feel like a big school, Jewish community, so many different things. I wanted it to have gender inclusive housing. Even if I didn't use it, I wanted it to be there, because I knew that that was a good sign.
Yes.
That we
Temple's a
had progressive.
wonderful place for being progressive, for sure.
Absolutely, exactly.
Mhm.
And I
Very
knew that there were a lot of
accepting.
progressive people there. And so I liked the music school. It's a really good music education program. So I was like, all right,
What do you
looks
plan
like
on
I'm going.
doing? What do you plan on doing with it?
I don't know. I thought I knew, but probably education of some sort, whether it be being a choir teacher, being a general music teacher, being just a regular elementary school or high school teacher of some sort, advocacy of some sort, just something with people and something with education. And
That's cool.
hopefully something with music, at least on the side, if not in the classroom. So
Yeah,
I'm not sure
absolutely.
yet.
That's
I'll keep you
cool.
updated.
All right, my last question is, what
Mhm.
advice would you give to people who are struggling with their sexuality or their gender identity?
I would say that sometimes you have to be really patient in order to be yourself, but the wait is always going to be worth it.
Mm.
Um, there are a lot of people who like can't come out or aren't ready to come out or don't know what they're doing. And that's why time is your best friend. If you can't come out because if you know your identity and you can't come out because your parents will kick you out or you'll lose your housing or food or anything like that, don't do that to yourself. It's harder at the time to keep it to yourself, but do your best to find people you can talk to or, have friends who you can talk to. But patience is definitely key.
Yeah, and I would also again like to point out, just as the psychotherapist in the room, that's great advice for everybody for anything.
Exactly.
That when you are in doubt, don't. To
Exactly.
wait. You can
Yeah.
always wait, get calmer, get clearer,
Hmm.
find a friend, talk it
Hmm.
out. You don't always have to do something with this information. You can wait.
You can
Your
wait.
whole
You can
life
sit
is
on it.
waiting for you.
Exactly. Even if you're 80 years old, I don't
Yeah.
care. But and I
Do
think
what's
that
best
that
for you, always.
exactly. And I think that perspective that you just said again is really important for people who don't understand this stuff because it brings this thing that they don't understand, like trans people, the LGBT and queer community, and it makes it like, okay, I can associate that. I can understand it now because like I don't think that I'm queer or anything like that, but this relates to something that I can relate to. So it's
Yes.
just like exposure and
Yes.
making it relevant to other people, which has been my
Yes.
goal this whole time that I have been advocating for the
Yes.
community. And
Well,
yeah.
I cannot thank you enough for being on the pod. I think that this has been great. I think you have really helped a lot of people to understand your process, which I understand is personal to you and not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily um, to be said for every trans person out there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that you really helped to clarify a lot of things for people. And this has just been both entertaining and educational,
Well,
which
thank you
is
so
what we
much for
love
having me.
most on Robin's Nest.
Yeah, I love listening. Thank you for having me on. And yeah,
Absolutely.
had a great time.
Thank you. And I want to remind everybody to please write a review. If you like this podcast on Apple Podcasts, I would really appreciate it, and tell your friends. And please follow me on Instagram at Robins_Nest_pod. And come back next month for my next episode in the series of Interview with a Stranger. Anyway, thank you again, Ben.
Thank you.